Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to wyomingpbs.org, click on Support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
The Wyoming legislature is halfway through its work in the 2018 budget session. I'm Craig Blumenshine from Wyoming PBS, and welcome to Week 2 of Capital Outlook. We'll begin with an interesting debate on whose responsibility it is to make sure that funds are available to provide employee housing in Teton County. Then we'll turn to the members of the Joint Appropriation Committee. What is the structural deficit and how much is it? We'll learn tonight. Then we'll talk about maintenance work at the Wyoming State Penitentiary that's planned. And then we'll turn to the leadership of the Wyoming legislature. Does the state have a role in saving Wyo Tech in Laramie? Also, what about funding for future construction of Wyoming schools and capital construction projects at the University of Wyoming? All that's on Capital Outlook, which starts now.
This program is supported in part by a grant from the BNSF Railway Foundation, dedicated to improving the general welfare and quality of life in communities throughout the BNSF Railway service area. Proud to support Wyoming PBS.
And in part by the Wyoming Public Television Endowment and viewers like you.
And welcome to Week 2 of Capital Outlook here on Wyoming PBS. We're in Cheyenne at the temporary Capitol in the Jonah Business Center. We have an interesting debate we're going to have to start off our show this week. Representative Mike Garreau hails from Teton County. Representative, welcome. And Senator Ogden Driscoll from Devil's Tower area. Welcome to Capital Outlook. We appreciate your time. An interesting debate that we want to, in a sense, recreate from a committee meeting that you both attended yesterday. It was the Senate Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions meeting. And to set it up just a little bit, we're going to talk about Senate File 114, Senator Driscoll, your bill. But right before that happened, there was a bill that came before the committee that expanded options for municipalities to maybe create improvement districts to do some certain things within their towns. Now, here comes your bill. First, describe for our viewers what Senate File 114 was for, and then we'll get into the discussion about the bill.
The bill has to do with basically government extracting money out of private business for affordable housing, as I understand it, Teton County. But actually the statutes go much deeper than that, and they allow for cities and counties to do this across the board. And so what we've run into in Teton County, and it was directed towards them when we did it, I became aware of what was going on and brought the bill because I really don't want to see this form of government spread to my side of the state. The example I used was a new 50-room motel into Jackson. The exaction fees are about $500,000 now, and it's going to go to around $2 million. And for a private landowner, I took it as a private property right, not as affordable housing. A lot of the debate turned towards affordable housing. This is a huge private property issue when you get into an area where someone from the government's telling you have to pay something in order to be able to do something that's outside of a permit process that didn't come about by a vote or you being able to have any way to have a say in it. It's just when you come in, it's, and I call it kind of the ease, you know, it's exaction, extraction, and extortion. And they're really telling you that you're going to have to pay something to be able to do something. And I had a hard time with that. I'll kind of drop it at the intro at that, and we'll go back and forth in fairness to giving Representative Mike the.
Sure. Just real quickly, what strikes me, Senator, and Representative Garreau will get into this, this was a local decision by local elected officials to assess these fees with developers, et cetera, et cetera. Representative, your side.
Yep, and thank you first for having both of us. And Senator Driscoll and I are old friends, and so it's good to be here with him and to talk about this issue. And I would never go so far as to call Senator Driscoll wrong on an issue, but I think on this one he's just a little short of being right. The problem is that this is a local issue. And this is a part of a local planning process that our community's been going through for well over 20 years. We have voted on elected officials in election after election using this as the central issue. I myself served 6 years as a county commissioner, and I work with private business on affordable housing fees and affordable housing extractions, as you call them. We call them exactions, to try to work with business and try to come up with something that was fair. Right now, our county is going through yet another planning process. Are the issues and are the exaction fees they're coming up with fair? I don't know. Matter of fact, good Senator and I might agree on a few more of them than he might think, but what I do know is that they're going through a full public process on this, and always the voters, and I guess this was my problem yesterday, is why in the world would we be down here in Cheyenne with so many issues, so many problems about funding for education, funding for state government, and all the things that we have on our plate, to take the time of the good senators, learned people, good people, and talk to them about something, frankly, that is a local issue that should be dealt with our county commissioners and our town council, and is on a daily basis.
Senator, they've decided that this is the way that they want to manage the affordable housing crisis in Jackson Hole.
Great point that you made, Mike, and I appreciate it, and it highlights exactly why I brought it. Is, our focus outside of budget issues this year is about how we're going to bring business to Wyoming and how we're going to expand our ability to do business in Wyoming. And, my idea of a business-friendly community isn't to say we're going to force you to do something. It's to say we're going to encourage you to do it. And I'm all in favor of a lot of the issues and the means it goes. I totally believe in local control. I also believe in the ability of the voters to have a say in it, and I see nothing in what they're doing that allows much of an appeal process or comes to the vote of the people. This is a decision that was made by a governmental body that really doesn't come up to the vote every year. Lodging taxes, different taxes, things we do, we bring them in front of the people, and I get the people run on it, but they're not getting to actually vote on it. I also think we have a little different situation there, that there may be some people who want to stifle development. And I'm really pro-development. I want it to go in a pro-development way. And, I'd kind of like you to think about where this might go. And
Representative, has it stifled development in your eyes?
Well, no. But the good senator's not wrong. There are folks in our community that would like to slow development down. Some that would like to stop it altogether. I'm not gonna disagree with them on that. And I too, like the senator, I'm a businessman, and I have been for 38 years, as has the senator. And so we both see eye to eye on some of these issues. And that's why I say, for example, in the town of Jackson, the town has worked with local developers and local business owners to try to come up with creative solutions. Our mountain resort, our hospital, our big employers work hand in hand with the local elected officials to try to work on creative ways. Our hospital district, and like I say, the Jackson Hole Mountain Resort, just single out one, and then there's some other local business owners as well, have worked hand in hand. And the city's given up height variances and other easing of restrictions to try to encourage development. There are some places that are so expensive and so hard to achieve the goal of affordable housing with incentives that sometimes you have to go the other way. So it is a carrot and a stick approach. And the senator's right, absolutely right, couldn't agree with him more. The things that happen in Teton County today, I hope, with the growth in our economy, I hope that they too will get the growth that they want to have in your county. And so I understand, and I understand the apprehension.
Senator, we'll give you the last word. I was just going to say.
Let me give you a little bit of an example in where it goes. And I applaud Teton County for what they've done, by the way. I think their efforts at affordable housing are great. The methods they're using are not so great. But let me give you something a little bit to think about, and let's move Mr. Grew to Casper. And we have a progressive council in Casper nowadays, and we're going to put a deck on our house. And to show you this isn't just business, because it allows it to happen everywhere. The city says to you as well, for the permit to put a deck on your house, we really need a new piece of playground equipment in Murad Park. And in return for you putting a deck on your house, you're going to buy a piece of equipment from Murad Park. You can't do it. And that's not how private business or any function does. And anybody that owns private property has a right to enjoy the use of that property. And when someone comes in and says you can only enjoy the use of that property or be able to leverage it for your good by being forced to do something that you have no appeal process to and no means to do it, that is exactly what I presented to the committee, and it's kind of shocking. It's communism. It's absolutely where we take one person's property and we give a piece of property to someone else. And with affordable housing, it's really that way. We have given them, someone else, a piece of property of value or at a discount that someone else paid for. And I really find that as a tough deal as someone that is a huge private property rights advocate.
Senator, it wasn't a state of Wyoming choice, and I think that's where this debate now is going to go. This bill failed by a tie-breaking vote from Chairman Case in the committee yesterday, yet I think the commitment was to continue to study this in the interim. Yep. Representative?
And I'd like just to clarify just a little bit. That was, a nice explanation, and I like the communism comment. But it just is, once again, just a little short on being true. And what is untrue about it, and the part that's just a little bit not true, is that we've gone through a 20-year planning process, beyond 20 years. We've gone through a half a dozen elections where this is the #1 issue in our county. People run on it. I ran on this issue when I was a county commissioner to work with business to try to come up with creative solutions. Time and time and time again, the local community has, and through this planning process, it's almost painful. I frankly don't even like going to the meetings anymore, because we sit there and debate and work through and work with landowners and work together to try to come up. I know sometimes folks come up on the short end of the vote, and when I'm dealing with Senator Driscoll, I come up on the short end a lot. So we both know that. But on the same token, in Teton County, we have worked this issue. The public is fully involved from literally from tea to green, as we say.
Could I ask you how many votes they've actually had of the people, not of someone running on a platform, but how many actual ballot initiatives there's been that says we'd like to be able to extract money from people for affordable housing? Have we actually done this? Come out and say,
we'll need to wrap it up here. Go ahead, Representative.
Yes, we have. In the town of Jackson, we have votes. The town, with their home rule statutes, have the ability to take votes on any planning issue that comes up, to repeal them. The county does not, because the state doesn't give them that. So maybe that's something you want to work on.
Let me just, as we tie up this segment, it was impressive to watch you two have a civil debate yesterday in committee, and it happens, quite frankly, quite a lot here, more than I think some people are given credit for. Everyone was listening. The chairman paused, a substantial pause, before he cast his tie-breaking vote, and it was a wonderful debate, and we wanted to bring that debate to our viewers, and I think we just did. So we'll follow this issue in the future. Senator Ogden Driscoll, Senator Mike Garreau, thank you. Or excuse me, Representative Mike Garreau, thank you for joining us on Capitol Outlook.
Always a pleasure.
And now we're in our second segment of Capitol Outlook this evening, and we're pleased to be joined by Representative Don Burkhart from Carbon County and the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, Representative Bob Nicholas. He hails from Laramie County. Welcome both to Capitol Outlook.
Good morning.
We are going to talk about the Wyoming State Penitentiary in Rawlins in just a moment. But before we get into that, I want to have a discussion for our viewers' benefit about your work on the Joint Appropriations Committee. Both the House and the Senate now are hearing amendments to the budget that you spent an awful lot of time in the last few months creating. And there's this thing called the structural deficit, that is a term that you hear here often. You've heard different numbers associated with that. And Chairman Nicholas, I'd like you to maybe define that for us and define where it is within the budget structure that you're considering now.
Well, there is no precise definition of it, but generally the concept is that if we're spending more money on government businesses than we take in. So right now, if you look at just on a spreadsheet, we're roughly between $800 and $900 million structural deficit with our current funding of education and what we have traditionally funded through our general fund and processes. And what we have been doing in Joint Appropriations Committee for the last 2 months, and with this budget bill, is address that. And from the House side, at least for the next biennium, if we're successful with the budget we presented, we're able to accommodate that and to some degree move the flag, if you will, to start developing reduced government spending and some additional expenditures and revenue enhancements, which will continue to reduce that structural deficit over time.
So what tactics were used to reduce that structural deficit to meet a balanced budget in this session?
So for the next biennium, we have roughly $300 million in cash on hand, or we will. And so
carry over, if you will?
Exactly. And so if you combine both education and the general side, it's roughly $300 million. With the 1%, grabbing the 1% severance and grabbing the 0.33% on the royalties, that equivalents to about $300 million a biennium. So that brings it up to $600 million.
And just to ask, this is money that used to be saved. Now we're using it as diversions to help fund this budget. Is that accurate?
That's partly accurate. I mean, back in the 90s, it wasn't saved. And back in the 90s, we used, at least in terms of the 1%, we used it to fund ongoing general expenses. As we were able to have additional revenues, then we moved it over and saved it. And frankly, as you know, in 2005 and since then up through just 2 years ago, we had more than sufficient revenues for the operations of government. Now, so what we're doing is we're going back to where we were in the 90s, where we did not have the revenues to meet our underlying obligations, and so we're relying that, which is basically our savings. So we're using our trusts and our savings from those trusts to carry us through this current financial problem.
And then there's also some spending out of the LISRA account.
Correct, and that's the other 1/3. It's about 250 to 270 million. So if you combine those together, it covers that structural deficit. And in the meantime, we have the efficiencies report that we're going to try to work on in reducing the size of government. We've got various other reductions that came through our Section 320s, and now there's a new reduction in government, which is called the Section 312 for this biennium, in other specific cuts, so that we're moving in the right direction. And we have House Bill 30, which is another reduction in education funding. And so because you can't solve all the problems without, having basically it's the old 5-part plan, which is now reduced to about a 3 or 4-part plan. But over time, at the current processes, and we'll have to see, because we got third reading to go tomorrow, and then we'll have conference committee, and there was some new additions, and there were some new cuts in the last night till about 10:30 at night, and so. But the plan's in place so that we can have a balanced budget and that we can begin to work down on this overall structural deficit.
Representative Burkhart, before we get into the prison discussion, which you're well informed about for sure, is this a solid strategy in your view that the Joint Appropriations Committee has taken? You were part of the decision-making process?
Yes, very solid strategy. Plans for the future, sets us up for the next budget, which I think we need to do in this one. We have to remember we'll have future budgets. I think it's an excellent strategy. We know where the money is, and we'll use it appropriately. All
right, let's turn our talk to discussion about prison, the penitentiary, the state penitentiary in Rawlins. Representative Burkhart, when we left a year ago, there was a lot of discussion on maybe the state will have to build a new prison. And we're in fact showing our viewers now some of the pictures that we took on a tour, which you were, I think, about an hour in front of us, Representative Nicholas, last year, of the prison. And on the face of things, there were some serious issues at the state penitentiary. But it's been decided, it appears to me, that a new prison is not required right now. Is that correct?
That would be accurate, Craig. We made a decision in 2016. There was a task force to study the prison, and that task force received recommendations from a consulting engineer that repairs would be about $87 million. And at that point, you start thinking, well, are we better off repairing or rebuilding? In the past year, in 2017, JAC, Joint Appropriations Committee, was given the task of, let's look at this again. Let's get a peer review, and we contracted with I guess you could call them forensics engineers who do this, evaluate sick buildings, bad buildings, and got an estimate of what they felt it would take to repair it, which was approximately $7.5 million.
Did that surprise you, given the numbers you'd heard before?
Surprise wasn't exactly the right word.
Yeah.
I'd say shocked when it's a tenfold decrease almost. And we sat down and had a long, frank discussion with them, and they gave us very good engineering logical reasons why and how they came to their estimation. And that was a deciding factor then. You mentioned the tour. We went on the tour at that JAC meeting at that JAC meeting decide to go with their recommendations as a committee recommendation. We've continued down that path. And I think one of the important things they said was, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Some stuff
broke, though, from
parts,
the visuals
yes.
that I saw.
Parts, yes, but other parts, no. And the analogy I've used is, I think most of us have a little crack or two in our driveway, but we're not going to replace it for that crack. We may repair the crack and watch it, and similar things at the pen. There were some things that we considered, and the engineers considered, to be a little more cosmetic than structural. So we went after the structural problems. What sets the base and the foundation for the building? And they're right now they're proceeding with that work.
Representative Nicholas, you also had a chance to tour the prison, as we noted earlier. You on board with that amount of money now is going to be adequate with repairing what was a real serious concern a year ago?
Well, I've toured it several times, and each time you go back, and particularly when you have the engineers with you, you learn more about what you're looking at and what is a risk, what is for catastrophic failure, what can be done to fix the problems that are there. And so to date, we've appropriated roughly, I think, almost $13 million from the beginning, from the get-go up until now, through direct appropriations by us and through major maintenance. And the WJE report pegged it that's roughly what it will cost. And so we're kind of pretty close to what those estimates are. And with and now as you keep going back, and Don and I receive literally weekly reports on what work is being done, what new problems arise, and it's what's rather remarkable, because at least once a month we get a new surprise of something showing up. But none of those things have been significant enough to warrant re-examination of our game plan. But
drainage issues, soil issues, all of those things.
Yeah, broken sewer pipes, and just all kinds of different things that roof issues. And so, and you know, the folks at the pen are in a tough situation because they have to have several people on duty for all the work's done. And so, to fix a problem, it takes what would normally take 2 people takes 5 people or 6 people. And so they have time constraints on their work. And part of those contractors are working through the middle of the night in order to get their work done. And so it's expensive because of the mechanisms and because security is the most important component of it. And our prison folks have done a wonderful job with accommodating it, trying to get this thing fixed, and trying to save the building. And all reports indicate now that will last another 15 or 20 years at least, if we do this right.
We have about a minute left. The legislature is deciding to save $10 million a year. Is that per biennium or per year?
Per year.
Per year, to put in a savings account for a new prison down the road, correct? Staffing concerns at the prison. Has the Joint Appropriations Committee addressed that directly relative to cuts that the Department of Corrections had to incur in previous budgets? Is that something that you're confident is being addressed? Representative Burkhart?
Greg, we believe it is. They've done some work giving raises to the lower levels where they felt they needed to increase their compensation a little bit. And I think it's working. They've done it throughout their system. They came to us and asked for more money, and they had a good case, and we gave them some more money to do that. We'll have to see how it goes. They'll come back in a year and show us statistics on retention of workforce and recruiting new workforce. So we'll see. But yeah, while the raises may not look like a lot to some people, I think they're significant for the corrections officers at the penitentiary and the other facilities.
Well, it's Representative Nicholas.
Well, just in a nutshell, because they have a lot of vacancies, they have extra cash. And so they came to us and said, we want to give pay raises, but we can give pay raises through the 1920 biennium using our own dollars, and that's roughly $2.1 million. But that to carry out those raises for the next biennium, we needed to appropriate about an additional $1.4 million to sustain those pay raises. And typically it went anywhere between $75 to $1 an hour. And so, like I say, it doesn't look significant until you see the total number of dollars. But we're hoping that that will be sufficient. That they're still understaffed, and they've been paying a lot of overtime. So we're hoping that they'll be able to beef up their staff, reduce their overtime, and thereby stay within the budget they provided us.
Well, it's going to now be an interesting week here at the legislature as amendments still come forward in the House. Same things happening over in the Senate. Then potentially the real interesting discussions in conference committees to iron out the budget.
It will be interesting.
More late nights in front of you?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Chairman Bob Nicholas, Representative Don Burkhart, thank you so much for joining us on this segment of Capital Outlook. We appreciate your time.
Thank you
Good
for
to see you
having us.
again.
On now to a profile of Representative Lloyd Larsen. We had a chance to visit with him before the holidays, and he had some interesting comments on what it means to run for the legislature. That's next. Stay with us. It's our pleasure now to be joined on this Capital Outlook profile with Representative Lloyd Larsen, who hails in Lander. We're in the middle of your wood shop here. You represent House District 54. Welcome.
Thank you.
Well, Representative Larsen, tell me, where are we at here? This obviously is a great hobby of yours.
It's more of a release. I don't think I'm really good at anything other than perhaps making sawdust, but it's a...
You're short selling yourself. I've seen some of your work.
I'm not really short selling myself. I can come out here and just sweep the floors and be as happy. I'm not really one to sit in the house and watch television or anything like that. So if there's some spare time, this is a good place to free your mind and smell wood.
You live on the southern edge of the Wind River Indian Reservation, and you know that I have also lived most of my life on the other side of the reservation, and you also are the chairman of the Select Committee on Tribal Relations. Lots of issues still today with tribal issues with the tribes that are maybe not settled. Tribal liaisons have been an issue for the state for quite some time. Why is that? Why has that been a hard program to make run smooth, if you will?
I would take one further step back from that and say a lot of the state government relations with the tribes have been difficult, and why is that? And I think it's because we oftentimes still fail to understand the fact that they're a sovereign nation, and so when we work with them, even though they're citizens of our state, but Congress, when they were put there, they were granted some special, pretty unique rights. And if I were a member of either one of those tribes, I would defend those rights as rigorously as they do. And so when our state agencies, for example, sometimes provide services of the state, they're providing those services through another government. So they'll go through the tribal councils, and it's not one, it's two. And so getting back to your question on the tribal liaison, sometimes I think we have failed to understand on the tribal side as well, perhaps on the state side, what is it that a liaison should do? Senator Case and I, a couple of years ago, kind of changed the statutes defining what a liaison done and what the responsibilities are, because we felt like the way it was set up is the state says, Eastern Shoshone tribe, send us, here's your funding, send us a liaison. Well, it's the governor's liaison. And the purpose of that liaison is to represent the governor in how he relates to issues that are on the reservation, that exist between state agencies or the executive branch or the legislature and those tribes, or that tribe, if it's Eastern Shoshone or the Northern Arapaho. And so it really should be the governor that is selecting who he wants, just like any other member of his cabinet or his staff. So we changed that, and we have it now to where the tribes will submit 2 or 3 names, but it's the governor's job to pick who that will be. And then, you know, I always envisioned it as something that, you know, if you have some struggles with the Department of Family Services and the contract they have with the Northern Arapaho tribe in compliance, maybe with an audit or placement of children, or perhaps the ICWA, the Indian Child Welfare Act, something that long, that the governor could go to his liaison and say, we're struggling here. Can you go identify with the tribe and see what that issue is and come back and report to us and work with our state agencies to see how we can resolve or mitigate the problem that we've got. That's how I see the liaison working.
But funding for those positions.
But funding for those positions has always been a struggle. And I remember a couple.
And I want to interject. The priority then of those positions has been reduced.
The priority of the position, and that really came down last year to funding. And it really came down last year to the way the legislature viewed those positions. I recall the question on the floor the year before that saying, why do we need 2 liaisons? Won't 1 liaison work? And my response was why can't Colorado and Wyoming have 1 governor? It's
competing interests, different interests.
Well, they're different nations.
Yes, different nations, sure.
They're different governments, and we're different states, and we wouldn't expect the same. And so you need to have a liaison that can represent the governor's interest to each tribe.
Discuss for me, Representative, if you will, the confusion that you helped mitigate to some extent in the Joint Appropriations Committee on what St. Stephen's School is.
St. Stephen's School has an interesting history. Chairman Nicholas, who chairs the JC, pointed out that when he was a young boy, it was actually a Catholic school. And he went, I think, elementary or part of his junior high school there. But then it became a Bureau of Indian Education School, like a Bureau of Indian Affairs. It's a federal school run by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Bureau of Indian Education Schools have separate funding, it's federal funding, and St. Stephen's was getting all of their funding from there. It's significantly less than what the state of Wyoming funds state schools, their state K through 12 schools.
Back to the Campbell decisions. Then.
Back to the Campbell's decision. When Fremont County, an old Fremont County legislature by Dr. Harry Tipton was in the legislature, and when Fremont County the reservation was part of his district at that time before they redistricted. He looked at St. Stephen's, says, you know, those are Wyoming citizens too, and they're not getting the education that they really deserved. And so he came forth with a bill, and the legislature agreed with his position that they should be funded. They should have the same access to education as any other child of the state. And so what Wyoming does is they look at what the federal government, the Bureau of Indian Education is funding St. Stephen's at, and then they supplement that to bring it up to the same level as what Wyoming schools in a geographic area are being funded.
And there were some questions then on enrollments and was there enough, et cetera, that you helped resolve?
Well, and enrollment on the reservation is an issue. We've got St. Stephen's, Arapaho, Fort Washakie, and Wyoming Indian High School, all their own districts on that. But
let's go there for just a moment. Let's talk a little bit about consolidation. I think that you might say there's opportunities for consolidation in your county, given
you think,
given the number of school districts that there are, both on and off the reservation. Your thoughts about consolidation? When we moved to Wyoming in 1980, and I come from one of the largest geographic school districts in
the lower 48 in Utah, which was the San Juan County School District, and I'd seen all of the school districts in Fremont County. I just didn't understand it. I couldn't comprehend why we would need so many districts in one county. As I've aged and gotten older, and I understand that they like the local control. I would be one that would argue that you lose local control if you would consolidate the districts. Consolidating districts does not mean that you close down schools and ship everybody to one centrally located school. It just means that you
Shoshone, for example,
Shoshone
should have its own high school.
would not have to go to Riverton. Du Bois or Pavilion wouldn't have to go to Riverton or Lander, and that wouldn't be necessary. But you'd have a superintendent for the district that in Fremont County.
A business office.
A business office. And the key, I think, to success is to make sure that you have proper representation on the school board. The school board is so critical in the success of any school district. We've had some challenges with school boards in Fremont County. We've gone through a lot of good administrators in some of our school districts because of the concerns that some school boards have had. So I think it actually broadens out the base and gives a more level opinion of what the administration's doing if you have all of the schools represented. But we can't do that legislatively. That we can suggest it. That's something that really, that consolidation is a local effort. I'm not seeing a lot of appetite for that.
But what brought you to Wyoming? Why did you come here from Utah?
I'm a Southern Utah boy. My wife's a Missouri girl. We met. I went to a trade school back in Missouri. We met. My father had moved to Rock Springs to take a position with a company that serves the oil industry in the mid-70s. When I finished up with school in Missouri, I worked for a while in St. Joe, Missouri. Had the opportunity to come here. Always wanted to get back west, and opportunity availed itself to move to Lander. My brother had already moved here. We worked for a number of years for the same company, and then my brother and father and I decided to hang out our own shingle and went into business. And in 1983, my dad lived in Rock Springs, and my brother and I lived here in Lander. We worked together every day for 30 years, and about 3 years ago we sold the business. We still work for the same company.
Oil and gas construction.
Oil and gas construction. We love Fremont County. We love Lander. I fully expect to be buried in Lander. Our children were all raised here. It's a great place to be. I can't think of any other place I'd rather be.
And you made a decision to run for the Wyoming legislature.
I did.
Why?
Interesting story. My brother and I are very close. I think I have more respect for him than probably any person that I've ever been associated with. And growing up, he's 4 years my senior, and growing up he was always, we fought a lot physically, but he was always very kind to me.
So you were typical brothers?
We were typical brothers. And
my brother would agree with that.
I think so. And I always trust his judgment. And this is a long answer to your question, but I've always been very interested in politics, tried to be involved civically. When Representative Del McComey, who had served House District 54th remarkably for 10 or plus years, when I was in my office one day, and my brother come in and he says, Representative McComey is not going to run again. You need to run for that office. Had never really given it much of a thought. Went home that night and thought about it more and thought about it more. And, it was time to shut up and put up and
file.
And anybody that's ever done that, you feel like you're dancing on the stage naked, because you just
You just scared away a lot of folks from running for the legislature.
What am I doing to, and it's not a personal decision. It's certainly a decision that you make with your wife and your family, and they have been supportive. We're kind of private people.
Representative Larson, I've said before on this program, the effort and the exhausting effort you put in on Joint Appropriations Committee cannot be understated or overstated, excuse me, and it's quite a lot of work that you had to do even to get to this point where we are today. So it's a pleasure visiting with you.
No, thank you.
On Capital Outlook.
Thank you
very much. And it's now time to begin our weekly conversation with the leadership of the Wyoming Legislature. Speaker of the House, Steve Harshman, and President of the Senate, Eli Bebout. Welcome back to Capital Outlook.
Thanks for having us. Good to be here.
Late night last night. There's going to be some late nights, I think, in your immediate future, but I appreciate your time with us today. Lots to talk about, and there's some budget issues to talk about, but one issue I want to start with is, does the state of Wyoming have a role in saving Wyo Tech over in Laramie, the trade school that is now potentially may close down, but there are opportunities with Laramie County Community College and maybe the state of Wyoming to do some work. Does the state have a role in helping Wyo Tech survive? Mr. Speaker, let me start with you.
Well, I don't know what that role might be, but I think we ought to at least ask questions and say, is there a way that this is it's been an important part of Wyoming for decades, and I don't think any of us have the answers on this deal. So we don't know if there's a role, but I think we owe it, I think, to our people, all the work we're trying to do to diversify and grow. And these are good jobs. A lot of these kids who come out of that, they're instantly hired in the industry in Wyoming. And but we ought to at least ask the questions. Is it an opportunity for the state to kind of grow in that area and do that, or is there a way we can help bridge that to another private buyer? That'd be great. I think so. We're continuing to talk about it.
Been in Laramie a long time, Wyo Tech has. Mr. President, what are your thoughts about Wyo Tech?
Oh, pretty much would agree with just what's just been said. We talk about with economic development, we look at recruitment and doing all those different things, but what about retention? Here we have a real viable entity that creates a lot of good paying jobs, and there's an opportunity there to keep it here in the state. We got to give it a full court press. I would lean towards having the private sector get involved and do it, but of the timing issues, and as I understand it, there's like $20 million worth of latest stage equipment over there that could be utilized that the owner of that equipment now would be glad to transfer rather than tear it out and sell it on eBay, if you would. So there's a lot of synergy there to move it forward. Private sector would be my first choice, but we just can't walk away. We've got to be involved. We've got to try to help. And ultimately, what the legislature will do, will set up maybe a loan to assist it as they develop their business model and move forward. But it'll go to the governor's office to make that decision. And we've got to take that, or like any other opportunity like that. Let's just don't walk away from something. Let's give it a full court press, try to make it work, see if we can help.
Let's move on to the governor's Endow initiatives. It's along the lines of certainly of economic development. Where does the legislature stand as we speak today? We're a day before this airs, so we're visiting on Thursday. Where are the Endow bills in the legislature, and what's their momentum?
We know where they are. Yeah. They're in the Senate.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Well, no, and there are a couple, all the blockchain, online, all those business kind of things are in the House, moving quickly through the House. A lot of excitement. Frankly, around the world. We have people from around the world flying into Cheyenne. I think MSNBC is going to...
CNBC. We'll be
CNBC is going to be out here. Thank you. And so there's a lot of buzz right now about that. And I think, and that's all hooked in then to these, the big, really 4 Endow bills are all starting in the Senate. And I think, so President Bebout can tell you their status.
Senator?
Well, there are 4 bills, actually 5 bills, but to speak to the blockchain, that's an important thing for our state. And, we are one of the, if not the leading state in the country to be able to have some good, responsible discussion about it and have some bills moving forward. I was just telling the speaker that about 10 minutes ago, I signed those to committees, giving them a high priority, and they passed the House overwhelmingly with a huge supermajority. So we're going to get right on those. We should. I think it's part of economic development. As to the other 4, actually 5 bills, we've started them in the Senate. We had good support on the introduction votes. You know, we're going to work them very hard. I think I'm committed to the Endow initiative. The governor has been leading it, and we've been working very closely with the House and with the Speaker to make sure these go through, and we're bringing them up today. You know, one of them has already passed. That was the one on the airlines. I'm committed to trying to do what we can for airline service. It's a critical part of what we heard from the Endow Committee. We're talking about workforce development. We're talking about connectivity. We're talking about entrepreneurial, build Wyoming, if you will, not build Wyoming, but startup Wyoming. And then we're talking about international trade. So those are the bills that are in the Senate. I'm supporting all of them. Hopefully they will come out of committee of the whole and move forward, and we'll send them to the House, and we'll be able to move forward on economic development diversification. Huge for our state. If not now, when? You know, it's not easy, but we've got to try.
Do you feel there's momentum, Mr. Speaker?
I think there is. I think there's, you know, and there's a lot of scrutiny by members, as it should be. And so we're going to have those discussions. They'll be robust and open, and we want people to stay involved with that and, you know, let their representatives know their thoughts on. But I think we really do have some opportunities that I think we can kind of continue to leverage. And I think as much as anything, you start spreading this good news, you know, and it starts feeding on itself. And I think we got a lot of advantages here, and we want to make sure we're kind of working together to not only, you know, make sure everybody knows what those advantages are and sell them, but I think just kind of, you know, kind of coordinate and spread this work, make it more effective.
One of the things, too, that's so important, I think, when you look at our state, and you do it as individuals or businessmen, you know, when you have tough times, and we're certainly having tough times, it's difficult to take money out of savings, whether you're a businessman or as a state, and to try to be proactive and say, now what can we do to get through this period and maybe broaden or diversify? I've had to make that decision as a businessman. You need to do that. You need to have that discussion. You need to be forward thinking, and that's the hard part, because we should have scrutiny. But to do nothing would be a real disservice to the citizens of Wyoming.
I want to let our viewers know that just before Capitol Outlook this evening on Wyoming PBS, we had a 30-minute Wyoming Chronicles show on the state of aviation in Wyoming that really dove into the Endow proposals surrounding commercial air service. And that show is available online if our viewers want to understand more about what's being proposed. I want to move on to school construction, and this really came to pass in the Senate on Wednesday. Mr. President, the Senate has really wanted, or it seems to be wanting, to put the brakes to capital construction as it applies to schools.
It was an interesting debate last night, and there was a particular amendment sponsored by one of my senator colleagues from Natrona County that said we shall do no more school capital construction. And I wasn't sure how the Senate would react to that, but what the debate in the Senate was is, you know, with the shortfalls we have in terms of revenues, and with everything going on, you know, maybe now is not the time to be building new schools. Maybe we should concentrate on major maintenance, which is huge, it's in there, and components. And the money was left in there to do that. The Senate just took a position that right now, for at least this next year before we come back in the next session, that there will be no school capital construction accounts, K through 12 being built, no schools being built, new ones.
Strong opposition to that, especially from the group here in Laramie County that's concerned about a Cary Junior High School. But there were some other comments that were made as part of that debate I want to visit with you both on. One of them was that the current school facilities program is gamed. Senator Nethercott was very forceful in her arguments about that it is gamed, and that the implication to me was it hasn't been administered fairly. Is that accurate?
Well, I think that everybody, you know, when somebody, it's not just about schools, it's about things in your state, and you know, we all are elected to represent our district, so it has happened, sure.
Mr. Speaker?
Well, I think the process has been worked on for 2 decades. So the process of evaluation and how schools rise to the top of the list, I think it's a good process. Okay, that's all I think been vetted. I think people around the state. I don't know. I didn't hear. I was down working on our end of the house. The Cary Junior High issue was at the top of the list. Got pulled off. So yeah, and then those monies got spread out across the state. Did that go against the system of ranking and doing all those? Absolutely it did. But, you know, the legislature appropriates that. Those were positions that were taken by the Senate, and there was a compromise in the end. And but I don't want to, you know, I don't want to say the legislative process the legislative process is what it is. That sometimes gets to be tough votes, you know, but I will say the process in school facilities, it's a good process. And we've done a lot of good across the state, and we'll continue to. I mean, we're not going to stop building buildings.
Part of the debate happened, of course, was that there's been different years and different lists and different priorities, and things change, and it's a moving target. And so the most recent recommendation from the School Facilities Commission and that select committee, and the speaker serves on it, was to go a different direction. And then what happened in the budget bill, the Joint Appropriations Committee saw a different direction to go. And so the Senate has a debate about, well, we think we ought to go back to what the Select Committee recommended, but it's long from being done, and we'll see what happens in the conference committee as we discuss that issue.
I think that'll be an interesting discussion. But I want to talk about the future of school funding, and then I want to get to funding issues concerning the University of Wyoming. A constitutional amendment is being proposed relative to how we're going to build schools in the future, which is, in my mind, maybe a step back to the past when local communities bonded for schools. Is that something you're supporting?
Well, I think, is this Senator Scott's amendment, a friend of mine from Natrona County? I think it's got a couple fatal flaws. The biggest one is this power equalization across, and I know he's trying to run a constitutional amendment because the Supreme Court said it's unconstitutional. And particularly, though, think how this works. You're going to power equalize, so people in Wheatland vote to build a new school, and they have their assessment ratios, but it's not, this bill power equalizes them. They don't have enough wealth in their local districts, so then there's going to be a statewide tax to power equalize. So you're going to say the vote of the people in Wheatland are going to raise taxes in Campbell County and Sheridan and Fremont County. I just don't think I just think it's not going to work. And it sounds great and all that stuff, but when you get down to how's this going to work, that actually it goes into morphs into a different kind of state tax system, and I just think I think it's going to have a hard time. Yeah. It's going to be tough.
And I don't agree with him on that particular one at all. You know, what he says about the power equalization is a true statement, except that now what happens, it's done anyway. Because we, the state, are responsible to pay for all these schools at the levels that they are built at and mandated to. So that happens anyway. What this does, the thing I like about it, you have some local buy-in. Local people say, yes, it's important enough to tax us at some level that we want to build a school. You were in Riverton when we built the school there. It was a tough vote. We saw the need. The voters stepped up. We voted for it. We bought it. We built it. So I just think we should have some local skin in the game. It's a tough deal when you start messing with the Constitution, and I understand the comments by the speaker. I just have a difference of opinion.
Well, I think, you know, that's all fine, this local, quote, skin in the game, but I think when you say people in other parts of the state are going to have skin in your local game through their wallet, I don't think that's going to happen, and I think currently it's paid by the extraction of minerals. And I think to say that Mr. and Mrs. Jones, we're going to raise your property tax on your house or your business in a community clear across the state on an election you have no power to vote in.
But
I just don't think
what's happening now, though, with the when you fund school capital construction, it's coming out of LISRA. That's taxes and money from all the people of Wyoming. Anyway,
no, it's actually coming from multinational energy companies.
We need to move on.
That's where it's coming from.
we need to move on, but great discussion, and I appreciate that. I want to talk about.
I would say this, and we have a bill, and the Joint Appropriations approved it also, to move some of this school capital construction to our permanent investment revenue, and those are permanent funds of the state that can provide for this. And so you move to a real stable source. It was coal lease bonus. That's gone away, but I think we have a solution to it.
I want to ask you to continue the capital construction debate, except as it applies to the University of Wyoming. As you both know, in 2019, the university is scheduled to break ground on its facilities relative to the science initiative, what has been discussed for a long time. Should that project move forward? Are you both committed to it?
Oh, absolutely.
About $100 million.
Right, and the money is in the bank. It's been approved already by the legislature, and it needs one more final authorization. I think it's been in process now for 6 years, I think. And so I think, again, as we move forward into the future, I mean, we're moving into the future. And really, what is Wyoming going to be like in 50 years? I don't know that any of us, but I think science and math and engineering and all those things that we value in our one land grant school are going to be huge. And I think these investments, none of us can probably predict, but I do think, you know, smart kids, smart Wyoming kids educated at the University of Wyoming are going to be the key. And so I think that it's enjoyed support in the past. I hope
Mr. President, should we go ahead and construct it?
Well, the point about having a science initiative is it is important to the university. We need to do it. The concern I have, and I'm not supporting now unless we figure out a way to come up with the money, and that's the issue. It's a good idea, it's a good project, but it's a matter of timing. And when we look at the demands on our revenue stream relative to funding K through 12, our structural deficit, all these different things going on, other projects in other parts of our state that are really important, you know, the state hospital, the WLRC in Lander, you know, the office building in Casper, a road over in Kimmer, all these things are important. So as I prioritize those lists, quite frankly, in the timing right now, the science initiative doesn't rise to the level of the other things. The good thing we did do in this budget bill, we paid for the capital, and I'm supporting that.
And we have about 20 seconds. The UW housing plan, should there be a moratorium on any demolition right now? And are you accepting the UW housing plan as it moves into the future with housing? We have about 10 seconds.
I support a moratorium, a slowdown, so we can get all the more people involved in this. And I think people of Wyoming need to weigh in.
And we're going to end on a positive note. The Speaker and the President,
I agree. All right, there we go.
I agree with him.
Well, Mr. President, Mr. Speaker, it's been a lot of late nights and a lot of late nights in front. Thank you so much for taking a moment to join us again on Capital Outlook. And I want to let our viewers know that this wraps up Capital Outlook Week 2 here at the Jonah Business Center at the temporary Capitol. We'll be back next Friday night with the third week. We'll know a lot more about Wyoming's budget then. Stay with us, and thank you for joining us.
This program is supported in part by a grant from the BNSF Railway Foundation, dedicated to improving the general welfare and quality of life in communities throughout the BNSF Railway service area. Proud to support Wyoming PBS.
And in part by the Wyoming Public Television Endowment and viewers like you.